Hi, everyone. I'm Emily.
And I'm Justin.
And together we are Root and River, and this is Synthesis. So, Synthesis is a Root and River hosted webcast that brings together nonconformist leaders and us, and we get to understand what makes them think and see the world differently. So that's what we're going to do today. We are really, really excited for this episode because we have Dr. Marcia Reynolds with us today, and we're thrilled to have her because I got to look at my list of accolades here. She is a doctor of psychology. She's a master certified coach. She's the author of 3 books, 2 of which I have right here. She's the director of coaching for the Healthcare Coaching Institute. And she is a teacher of not just coaching, in my experience of reading her books and hearing her speak, but also a teacher of teaching us about ourselves and how we can understand how our emotions are moving through us and how we can really harness them. So very, very excited for the conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for asking.
Yes, yes. So we would like to start out, we love to start out with Root and River. Everything we do, we kind of go, as you may have guessed, to the root. So for you, we'd like to start out with asking you, what is one lasting childhood memory that you maybe still revisit from time to time now that really powers you in all the work that you do?
You know, it's interesting, that question. I thought, well, there's the good things I remember and the things that were not so good or didn't feel good. Even though I learned from them. But I have to say that going back even to when I was young, that my parents always instilled in me, especially my father, to stand up for what I believe and to question things that are put forward to me as dogma. Like, this is it, this is the truth. And always to say, well, what makes that the truth? You know, which of course, that's what I do today as a coach, but that type of thing is in many ways helped shape who I am, but also got me in a lot of trouble.
What kind of trouble? Like, when do you have a memory of, we love to ask this question because it's like, sometimes when you get in trouble at a young age, it's really tapping into where that early childhood paradigm bumps into the world, and there has to be some sort of reconciling. So do you remember getting in trouble as a child, maybe for something along those lines?
Well, I used to get in trouble all the time for talking too much. That was one thing. You know? And that was kind of a norm in my family. At dinner time, it was all over the place. You know, my father went deaf, and he, as he was going deaf, he had hearing aids, and he would often just turn us off.
That's handy.
Yeah. So I was always sitting in the corner, and yet I always got straight A's, which demonstrated that I didn't really have to listen to them in order to get what I needed. But when I would question my teachers, that many times, you know, it wasn't invited. It wasn't until the 7th grade that I had a teacher that fully understood me. In fact, I found my report cards after my mother passed, and on all of them, on the comments, it was like, well, she has a social problem, something's wrong with her. But that 7th grade teacher just wrote one long sentence and said, doesn't she love everyone? You know, and it's like that understanding that I was different in the sense that I think in my upbringing, and you know, you had one of your questions on the list even about how that even tied into my religion, and that was a part of my religious training, was to question.
So your parents, that they created this space for you to kind of explore ideas, express them, and that's a beautiful thing. I think that's something that Emily and I have, one of the many things we have in common with the way we raised our respective kids.
Great today.
Yeah, right. And to be whole humans and curious and question authority and et cetera. How did your parents know to do that? How did they know? Like, what was their prompt coming from an era where questioning authority in particular may have been frowned upon? How did they know to do that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that fortunately we are evolving, even though sometimes it doesn't look like it. but but in terms of like parenting, that I think that attitude of I will not do what my parents did. When we look at the things that we recognize are damaging, I mean, honestly, I think that a lot of us had more therapy than our parents' generation, and understood that when we were quieted, when we weren't, asked for our ideas and our views, that it became shaming.
Right.
And so we recognize that and don't want to do that, to the generations
Right.
below us, that are younger than us. So I think that, and even, bringing coaching into the world in many countries, so I do work globally. Next month we'll be in 4 countries, and many of those countries don't have therapy as like an okay thing to do. Here it's like, we readily go. And so they've ended up coming to coaching to help them to critically analyze their thoughts and to discover what is my thought versus what are the thoughts that were imposed on me? What are the beliefs I inherited, and are they really true? These questions that we may, allow our children and encourage our children to ask, they don't necessarily. And I think coaching is bringing that in more into the norms of their societies, which I absolutely love.
Yes.
That's really interesting that in certain cultures where, therapy is maybe seen through a detrimental, through a tainted light, sign
yeah.
problem. But now that coaching has come along, that's a place for people to go, and it's so much more accepted. I think that's wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So and I wonder if what is that? Maybe I'll ask this question broadly first. What would you define what would you say is your definition of coaching? Because you said something just then that I thought, I wrote it down. My thoughts versus the thoughts imposed on me. So I almost think that's almost like a little tidbit of what the heart of coaching is. But in all your experience, what would you define coaching as?
I do adhere to the ICF definition of coaching, but I can say that I helped to define that in the early years. And many people will call what they do as coaching, and it's in different realms. But if you go to International Coach Federation School or other credentialing organizations around the world, that the definition of coaching rests in partnership. That I believe you are a fully functional, smart, healthy-ish person, and that you don't need me to fix you, to advise you, or heal you. That I just need you, to hold up the mirror so you can listen to yourself, and know, when you're expressing certain emotions that may define key thoughts to you, key values that you hadn't discerned before. So in the ICF definition, it's that we engage in a partnership in a creative, thought-provoking process, and we believe people are creative, resourceful, and whole. So it's not a doctor-patient relationship. It's not a consulting expert, I like to say expert dummy, or I know better than you. And I'm sure, Emily, when you said, when you're talking about branding, that you try to discern what, from them and ask them questions to see their perspective and what they want. Because if you just came in and say, here's what I think, it's not going to work.
Precisely.
Yeah, and they probably won't accept it in the first place because you didn't ask them. And the other thing is that too many, for years, parents and corporate leaders, created very dependent thinkers. And now in this fast-paced world, we have to create independent thinkers and help people to truly think for themselves and to take their thoughts out and look at them and say, oh my, look at that. Isn't that a crazy thing I've been thinking and doing all these years?
Yeah.
There's something that would be more effective.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So backtracking just a little bit and kind of tying these together, this path you've been on,
Yeah.
When you begin to have an inkling that coaching, or maybe you didn't even know to call it that, but this place that you're at now as a credentialed, original thinker. That's what I would give you this. You're not a karaoke singer. You have your own thoughts and ideas, and you've distilled them in such a, just in reading the Discomfort Zone book in particular, but also reading other things about you. When did you begin to have an inkling that this might be where your life's work would be?
There was two, I would say, pivotal moments. And first off, even knowing that my path was to be a guide for people, again, not necessarily tell them what to do, because I don't know everything and don't think I will in this lifetime. But when I first started going to college, I always wanted to write. So there's my books, but I was a journalist. And then I found I didn't really like that and went into broadcasting. So my first master's is actually broadcasting, which of course I didn't end up doing, but I landed in training departments doing instructional video. But I have to say that even before that, not knowing, I always liked working with people and exploring things, but I had a very difficult adulthood, ended up spending 6 months in jail. And it was fascinating because it was the women in that place that really defined my strengths for me. When I thought that my life was over, they were like, "You're crazy. You have more opportunity than most of us. You have education. You're smart. You're courageous, and you need to go out there and make an impact in this world and let people know, no matter who they are and what they've done in their past, that they can accomplish great things." That was the motivation they gave me. That set me on a path. And it wasn't easy. There was still, a struggle climbing out of that world. But 3 years later, I graduated summa cum laude from Arizona State University. I'm like, oh, I have something significant to share, but it still wasn't clear. So I accidentally ended up in training departments. In the first one, they dumped the whole management training in my lap. I was 20-year old. And so I went back to get a second master's in education so I could figure out how to train, because I didn't know. So that's why I have 2 masters. It was survival. But I found working with people and helping them be leaders, true leaders, not just, good managers, but leaders, just inspired me. And I went on to work in high tech for 11 years, worked for companies that didn't do well, and then companies that were huge IPOs, and truly learned that whole system. Never really felt I fit into it, but learned it. So I was about to leave and go start my own business when I read this article in coaching, and I said, oh, working with people one-on-one to truly help them think for themselves was far more inspiring when I got that chance than standing in front of a classroom and instructing. So I just signed up for a coaching school, and the rest is history. It became my, it was the perfect timing, 1995, when coaching was just launching into the world. My school created the International Coach Federation, so I was able to become a leader in that space fairly quickly. So it felt like this was the path I was supposed to take. And I'd say people, I do this coaching thing. Coaching was my life. And even now, like writing a coaching book that takes in all that I've learned about coaching in the last 20 years globally, feels so right. So it's been a zigzaggy, interesting path, but I had to do those zigzags to truly understand human nature at all levels, and to have compassion for whoever I'm with. And so that darkness was really my light.
Beautiful. How interesting.
We often ask our customers, our clients, when we're doing what we call a root session, which is our deep dive into the soul of their brand, get into this idea of mission, which is the fuel of the brand. And one of the questions we ask them is, what were the darkest times of suffering, and what did they teach you about empathy for others? And so what you said just really resonated with this idea that looking at our dark parts and what we would, label failure in quotes, these lessons, really all they did is they were part of that propelling each of us forward. And I think that maybe as a part of just enlightenment or awareness in general is that when you realize that your suffering has some meaning, like, I went through this so that I could help other people. That makes so much more sense than it happened to me because there's something wrong with me,
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's regrets in my life. I don't know anyone who doesn't have them, but I always say that part of my life was another degree. And if I can look at, it's not failures, it was like, some weird steps I decided to take. And I have fully analyzed what led me to that. But can you hear that noise? I'm sorry, my door is open and there's a lot of noise.
Okay. That's
You're
right.
okay?
I hear birds.
Okay, good.
Between your words, so it's nice.
No, they're having a skateboard fest out there.
It's all good.
Okay, good. It's just such a beautiful day. I have the door.
It is. It's gorgeous today.
I know. So, if we learn from everything that we experience, then there should be no serious regret. Would I have liked to have taken some other steps? I think about that at times. What would be different in my life? But again, that I did something 40 years ago that prompted me on this wonderful journey I am now. How can I regret that I did survive, and get through it. So I do believe there's reasons, for what happens in our lives, and
wonderful.
Yeah, and I was supposed to go through that to be who I am today and to be able to do the work I do.
Great. So you mentioned moving from dependent thinking and into independent thinking. So we teach a lot and talk a lot about sort of old world thinking that tended to be more managerial in nature and managing people and creating dependency and very task oriented or systemic thinking or systems thinking. Versus in the new world where things are a lot more spherical and leadership. This is the world of leadership. So for you, obviously you see that too, and you work with people to help make that transition. But for you and your work with leaders, coaching them to be leaders and not managers, what is the biggest blind side or the most frequent blind side that you run into in trying to peel back that curtain and give them the skills to be leaders who are engaging independent thinking?
First off, the couple of beliefs. The belief that, I have to demonstrate I know everything. It's like, that's a big responsibility. and the higher you go up, the less you will know, because people below you are specializing and you're supposed to be looking out into the world and strategizing. So to count on people to have knowledge and that I've never really seen where people have said, "Oh, I'm disappointed that you don't know everything." Instead of just saying, "Wow, I have ideas on this. I'd love to hear yours. You do this every day." How empowering is that?
Yeah.
And the second belief that I think so many leaders get into this, I don't have time for that. If they come in and ask me a question, it's just so much easier to tell them what to do. And again, it creates not just dependent thinking, but where they almost don't want to think. It's for themselves. It's a learned helplessness.
Yes. Yeah.
And, right. And it's like, you know, but then they keep coming in your office and asking you questions and you don't get to do, you know, get your work done. Wouldn't it be nice if they thought for themselves a little bit more, you know, and couldn't you help them do that? Because it's probably more about their confidence than it is their lack of knowledge.
Right.
So, you know, so really looking at the use of time, that they see that wrong, that it may take a little more time up front, but so much free time, not empty time, but time to do other work, more important work at the level that they're at as a leader, instead of, you know, putting out fires and solving people's problems.
Right. Yeah. So I would say this, you're a bit of a ninja in that you have all this amazing credentialing and influence, you know, that's very impressive, but you are, in my view, a very non-conventional thinker when it comes to coaching. Like that's what really jumped out in reading the Discomfort Zone. And I will confess that when I got the book, I read it, I began to read it, I opened it with a spirit of obligation. I finished it with a spirit of absolute curiosity, and it immediately rocketed up to my top. Like I get asked all the time, we get asked all the time, what's a good coaching book? And there's some, but there's something about this. And so it's kind of leading into this question is, you have these non-conventional ideas. How much friction have you run into from corporate leaders that are like, oh, that's not going to work around here, or you can't say that, or you can't do that? How much friction do you run into, and how did you deal with it?
Okay. You know, it's an interesting thing. There is, to a certain level, like they don't really like when I talk about opening your heart and your gut, you know, the nervous system.
Yes.
Which is science.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, it's like, oh, we can't talk about heart. You know, that freaks them out. Gut, okay, heart, not so much. But, you know, there's such a resistance to difficult conversations. And how many times when I'm teaching leaders coaching skills and I offer to do a demo, it's like everywhere in the world, it's the same thing. They sit down and they say, I have a difficult conversation to have. And then they avoid it or they dance around it instead of just getting into it and really processing with the person and helping them grow. And so the concept, I mean, even if you look at my Amazon reviews, you know, the people that say, wow, I thought this was going to help me not feel uncomfortable, where you're telling me to create discomfort. But I always demonstrate to them what we're trying to achieve in the brain. And that if you just stay on the surface with problem solving and giving advice, you know, you're just using the limited cognitive brain. You're not really changing anything. Do you want them to change their behavior? Then you have to help them see themselves in the world entirely differently. That automatically changes behavior as soon as my perspective shifts. And that's not often a comfortable situation when I realize, oh my, I've been actually sabotaging myself for years. You know, by insulting people in meetings when I thought I was being the experts, and, you know, things like that. And so we're not harming people. You know, my great mentor always said, nobody ever died from coaching. And because we're not giving them advice, it's like, well, we can't steer them wrong. We're helping them think for themselves. Yeah. So, you know, I come from, my thinking comes a little bit different. Most people look at coaching as maybe it came out of the therapy world or consulting. Because my second master's was in learning psychology and education, I come from how do we learn? And I have found coaching to be the best technology there is to create behavioral learning. You know, and if you go back to the early 1900s and looking at what they were trying to do in educational reform to get teachers to ask more questions, you know, and prompt inquiry. Not, you know, I always say questions seek answers, but inquiry provokes insight. And how do you really do that? That's the book I'm writing now, is really getting into this inquiry process. And that's different. That helps people learn about themselves and how they see the world in a different way. So it's not built on therapy. It's a different modality that people often don't realize.
It's really, it seems to me, and I'm the layman here on this, but that it's more adult development theory than it is cognitive behavior therapy.
Right, and how do our brains develop?
And it shows the foolishness of the concept that can't teach old dogs new tricks.
Absolutely.
You can't teach old dogs new tricks if they want, if they're very attached to their martyrdom status of being overworked, overstressed, underappreciated.
Yeah.
If you can set aside that, then you can do that. You can do that work. So that's very powerful.
Yeah, and protecting what they know. So they oftentimes, the older they get, and I learned this from a Stanford professor with his scientists. He said they get so rigid in their thinking, they don't want to hear new ideas because they're protecting, their discoveries and what they know. And so the older we get into this more of a protection mode than an open learning mode. And, that's dangerous for companies and for ourselves, for our lives.
It goes to that learned helplessness and creating kind of a high functioning codependency.
It's interesting too that happens so frequently in higher education, where it's all supposed to be about knowledge, but you see a kind of a shutting down or a very hierarchical view of somebody coming in with new ideas, and like, no, that idea doesn't have its credentialing yet or whatever.
Right. It's why I always got in trouble with my teachers.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I'm like, I see it differently. And boy, they didn't like that.
Yeah. As part of this, we see more and more of, and we have the fortune of working with more and more people who we call them corporate escapees, who are have been waiting for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years for this monolith to shift more towards this philosophy. And they're tired. They've timed out for whatever reason. And now they're beginning new ventures. And maybe they've worked, in a lot of cases, we see people after they've worked with a coach that was brought in by the company, and they've really realized that they can't make the change that they want to see in this space. So they're starting endeavors that they're designing to allow them to use coaching and to they're not necessarily coaches, but to use more of an inquiry style of living in the world and working in order to raise consciousness or start a for-profit, start a nonprofit. So my question is, are you seeing that as well? Or what are the shifts that you're seeing inside of these more established corporations or other entities?
One of the great things that came out of the last two recessions is that people lost their jobs and found their dreams. Because of that, I have a family to support, and I can't leave. So that started shifting, that people found, wow, I got laid off, and that was the best thing that happened to me. But what we're also seeing, and this was in my doctoral dissertation, I was looking at high achieving women in the workplace, and because they had less tenure, they would leave jobs much sooner than the men and this was like mid 2000, 2005, 2006, when I was doing the research. Men are leaving now too. But they were leaving not for money. They were leaving because this is not challenging enough. This doesn't fulfill me. And there's something more for me out there. Well, what we're seeing is that trend, has expanded, like I said, now with both men and women. And the time frame is less. It used to be, we'd stay at least 5 years. Now it's 3 years, now it's 2. And so it's become normal, for people to say, okay, been there, done that, I'm out of here. And more acceptable because, it's happening in numbers, and we're not looking for a company to take care of us, because that clearly didn't work. They were laying people off, laying our parents off. And that, like you said, the coach is bringing up, like, what have I been numbing and tolerating for all these years when there's something else that I really want to do? That's become a normal conversation with people where we couldn't think of it before. So, they were shocked when I left our company because I left 2 years of unvested stock on the table. I'm like,
Yeah.
I got 2 years. That's enough. I have something else I want to do then. And I hit the glass ceiling and they were still shocked.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. And sort of the tipping point for me was I had thought, my old belief was like, I'll find another place to work that'll be closer to the culture that I want to work in. And I really believed that existed. And then I just hit my head a few more times and I went, oh no, if it exists, I don't have time to find it. It's going to be a needle in a haystack. So I'm going to have to create it.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
Or let me try.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So in the spirit of that, kind of continuing this thread, so as a coach, as a teacher and developer of humans, what are some coaching practices that an entrepreneur should learn? I'll leave it at that. What are some coaching practices that you would teach an entrepreneur?
Well, the first one is a word you mentioned a little earlier, and it's called be curious. So we start there of can you stop and I always say, can you give up being the expert in order to be the coach? So can you just stop and be curious? What is this person really asking for? What is it they know already? Is it that they're afraid to do what they know to do? So what's really going on here? So that would lead to asking some questions to define what's really happening and what does this person really need from me in this moment, instead of just assuming they need my brilliant advice. So we start with that. And there's actually 3 things that I teach that before you even go into a conversation, start with the intention that you're there to help them, not just help you. But the second one, to really be aware of how you feel, so Emily, you mentioned around emotional intelligence. So if I'm disappointed or angry, well, it's going to curtail the conversation. So can you be curious and care about the person in front of you and bring that energy into the conversation? So to learn how to identify what am I feeling in this moment and how to shift, emotional intelligence means choosing. The root of the word intelligence means to choose between. So just learning some basic EI skills in emotional recognition and choice is really important, and which will lead you to having more empathy to other people. It's a nice natural shift that happens. But the third thing is, you must hold people in high regard. I have to know that you believe in me and trust me, because if you don't, I'm going to know that, and I'm going to shut down. So if you have lost your trust in the person, what's it going to take? So I may be disappointed with you. And then it's better that I say, you've made this promise, 5 times and you've not upheld it. So I'm a little disappointed in you right now, which is really hard for me to believe that you're going to actually do what you say. I would much rather you say that, than just go in being angry and disappointed and not talking about it. So what's it going to take to believe in this person's, at least their potential? Because if you can't, then why are they working for you?
Right.
So, yeah.
Such a simple but such a profound question. Like, if you don't believe in them, then why are you spending your time and energy with them? Yes.
So maybe there's that difficult conversation you need to have.
Well, you said it earlier, Marcia, about this shifting of perspective, like a changing of a lens. And if they're kind of classically trained leaders in the sense of sort of the MBA style of thinking, or as Emily said earlier, like systems thinkers, there's still a bias that the people are part of the people are like a cog in the machinery. So they're going to respond the same way as machinery. So they need to be fiddled and fixed, and they have this sort of mechanic. This is why older men, in my opinion, as a middle-aged guy, why they struggle in modern business, because there's nothing to fix. But the shift is, and this awakening, and this is awesome to see it when it happens, is that shift to, the people are the machine. Like, they are the machine. They're running it for me, and I need to give them love and attention and respect. And in order to give them love and attention and respect, I got to give it to me. And So it's a self-perpetuation of healing that goes on, which makes sense when the reverse of it was true, is that the wounded leader wounds his people. Well, if a healed leader then would help heal his people, and that's in essence, the way I would describe your coaching is separate from remedial coaching, which is sort of fixing the machine, as opposed to transformational coaching or adult learning type coaching.
Yeah.
That's what produces that. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you just named the shift that is occurring, and slower than we hoped. I always said, I count on the next generation of leaders to be this way, and it's taking a little bit longer. I'm still counting on it though.
Yes.
One question that's related to this, and I have so many questions, but is this other trend that we see of this overworking. And a report came out yesterday I was just listening to it on NPR about how it's verifiable, overworking actually makes us less productive. And, this longitudinal study that just came out the other day. And so how do you coach, or what advice would you give to a leader who has been sort of steeped in that philosophy of, the grind, that all of his or her team needs to be grinding as hard as possible, because that's really how you get ahead. We see that a lot. And so curious to see what you would say.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. The idea of, we have less vacations than certainly all the European countries, and they do just fine. So that work ethic that we have that burns people out, burns them to the crisp, is crazy. And there again is one of those beliefs that people must work 15-hour days in order to get things done. Really? When the evidence, you said, there's a study that just came out, but studies like that have been coming out for a long time, the effects of not enough sleep. And it's been proven that here in the US, nobody gets enough sleep, that, you're not functional anymore after a certain point. That in fact, and I think I shared this, Emily, that our brains are most efficient when we're laughing and having a good time. When I'm under stress, the blood then is directed to my large muscle groups, which means it's very little of it getting to my brain. So that overwork and over stress does not make people more productive. It makes them make more errors. So that if we, more encapsulated the time we're working and make sure that people enjoy their lives, they actually are more creative, efficient, and productive. But again, that's a belief system that has to change, that some people are just holding on to. So, yes, and you can give them all the evidence and it's still, they're like, no, we have deadlines and KPIs and have to get this done.
Yeah, and now you're seeing that. I think what we're starting to see is that applied to self-development and personal growth, which is weird. The books that you've read. Have you read all these books? Have you listened to all these podcasts? Have you gone to the yoga retreats? And there's this, and it's such an interesting dichotomy to me.
Yeah, we went from applying perfectionism to business processes to applying perfectionism to personal development, which is
my God, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my humanness. Is there somebody now at my door, and because my door's open, expect me to come? Do you mind just 10 seconds?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
This is how we roll at Synthesis. It's totally real.
We're not cutting this out.
No, we're not going to cut it out.
This is awesome.
Please enjoy the music while Marcia goes to the door.
No, it was like the craziest thing, because these people did their service weeks ago, and they're only supposed to come once a quarter. Of course they come now.
That's all right.
That's life. That's life. It's real. Well, as we start to, we're going to wrap up here in a minute. So we usually have one question that wraps it, but I actually have two. I don't know, Justin, if you
got one. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we'll have the same one. You never know, because sometimes we do that mind meld thing. Okay. All right. It'll be choose your own adventure. You can answer one of mine, and then Justin, last one. So my question is, question A is if you could get everyone in the world to read one book, what would that book be? We did it. Okay, so we get 2 questions. So that's the first one. Okay, so ready, go.
You know, that's fascinating. There's a book that I use in my teaching that so few people are familiar with. I learned it, before my degree in education, I started in counseling, and then it didn't do it for me. But it's a book called I and Thou, written by Martin Buber. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he looks at the positions of who we are with people, of the me, you, where we're totally disconnected. I see you in the hallway, hi, and there's nothing. I, it, which is often what managers do. And Justin, it was what you were describing. You know, you're here to help me meet my KPIs. So you're an it. And that's so prevalent. And we do that in our families as well. We fall into that. But if I move into I, thou, where I see you as sacred, and that I that whole thing about I believe in you, and I know that there's more that you will do in this world. It's different. And in my teaching, I then go to the next level and I say, thou. You know, so Justin, that comes back to your thing about we have to work on ourselves as well. That that I am a sacred being too. You know? And we are in this space together, and it's going to be amazing what we can create. Right. So I think there's so many gems in that classical book.
And what's interesting, you quoted that in Discomfort Zone, I believe.
It's true.
So I read 3 or 4 books at a time. And the second book I'm reading, I'm just about done, is called The Antidote. And it's the subtitle is Happiness for People That Don't Like Positive Thinking.
Oh, I love it.
He quoted Martin Buber as well in that book. I'd never heard of this person until your book and his book. So I'm like, okay, I'm paying attention now. So go ahead in with the second question.
So the last question that we have, unless you have another one, Justin.
No.
Okay, so our last question is so synthesis means the bringing together of separate or disparate ideas to inform a higher truth. So do you have a higher truth that's on your heart to share with us and our audience today that has come from maybe 2 separate ideas or many separate ideas?
You know, that's interesting. One of my life quotes, and I think it relates to that, is by Thoreau, who said, I have too many more lives to live than to spend any more time in that one.
Yes.
Yeah. The time to move on. And this, I think, brings us full circle. You know, whatever happened in my life, you know, was a learning moment. And I don't have to be there anymore, because now I'm moving on to something else.
That's right.
Beautiful.
And so we synthesize our lives then, and we don't have to stay on one track.
Right.
That's amazing. Really amazing. And this conversation has been so rich. So thank you so much for joining us today.
And our conversation is great.
Yes, and to all of our watchers and listeners, like definitely put this on the queue of books to read, both of these and your other book, which is Wonder Woman, which I'm going to get right away. And thank you once again, and we look forward to future conversations.
I would love that. Okay, great. Thanks.